Welcome to the Darkstream. VoxDay, voxday.blogspot.com, and Infogalactic News. Sorry I missed you this weekend, but we actually had an amazing time. You want to talk about a meeting of the minds? I was actually today with two other writers, some of whom you might have heard of, some not. I actually have their books right here. Let's see here. So it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool because Piero San Giorgio, who is a very good Swiss-Italian writer, he and his lovely wife came over, which was cool. And the reason he came over was because he wanted to meet Martin van Creveld. And so Martin was actually in town. He's in Europe. He's being consulted by all the various militaries and war colleges and all that sort of thing. And so Piero had mentioned that he's a bit of a Van Creveld fanboy. And so we arranged to all get together, and it was really fascinating just to be able to listen to two extremely smart, extremely well-educated observers, talking about what they see in the world, what they see going on, and their perspective on all of that. And so it was a real privilege to get to be there and participate. What I thought was kind of the interesting thing is that we were all more or less in agreement about the prospects for both Europe and Asia. We didn't really talk that much about the United States. But one thing that I think that people are failing to understand and that they're not paying attention to is what is going on between China and Africa. Now Piero actually has a fair amount of direct experience because he lived and worked in I believe 2 different African countries, and Martin he spends a fair amount of time paying attention to what the Chinese military is up to. I believe he frequently is involved in various conferences over in Asia and so forth. And so, what a lot of people don't realize is that there are literally millions of Chinese factories, Chinese businesses, all being set up over there. And the number of Chinese there is actually considerably force multiplied by the fact that they're almost all there as managers. Like, in fact, I think it was Piero's wife who mentioned that you would be at a factory or something, and all the workers would be African, but the manager or the managers would invariably be, you could see him somewhere in the distance wearing the straw hat. And so she said that was how you could always tell that the guy running the place was Chinese. And so if you think about the fact that how much is being run, so that we're not talking about, generally speaking, we're not talking about a bunch of low-level shop owners, kind of like you have in Vancouver or whatever, much less what you had in the American West Coast in the 19th century. You're dealing with a very different situation. And so I think that this is going to be something that is going to have a absolutely massive effect on how things are going to shake out for the world. There's going to be a big knock-on effect because what is going to happen when the Africans are pushed out of Africa. Where are they going to go? Well, the natural place that they are going to go is going to be either Europe or the USA. And so, this is something that is potentially as significant as the current south to north migration that we're seeing from Africa and from Turkey into Europe. Umberto Eco, in my recently published Crisis and Conceit book, I quote a Umberto Eco article called Migrazione, which was dealing with that south to north movement that he considered to be inevitable. And this was something that he wrote about quite some time ago. It was like on the order of 20, 25 years ago. Well, he was right about how significant that movement of people turned out to be. I suspect that this largely unknown, largely unrecognized movement of the Chinese into Africa is going to be every bit as significant as that earlier movement that Umberto Eco was talking about. So, yeah, I'm sorry. I noticed that the comments are very hit or miss, and same with the hearts. They seem to sort of appear in chunks and then just stop appearing for a while. So, anyhow, it's Periscope. I can't do anything about it, so I'll just carry on. And if you happen to get a question in that I can address, I will do so. But yeah, it was definitely fascinating. The other thing that we talked about is that, how many were we talking about? Well, that was interesting because somebody, I don't remember, I think one of the wives mentioned that she didn't think that there were that many Chinese over there and was surprised when Piero said something about 3 million. I said, if I recall, that the number was closer to 10 million, and he admitted that the 3 million was probably out of date. But one thing I remember, and I'm working from memory here, so I could have the number wrong, but if I recall correctly, at one point the Chinese Politburo was considering a plan to put as many as 100 million colonists in Africa. Now, that's pretty damn significant when you think about what the population of Africa was as recently as 1950, 1960. So, all of these projections about the idea that there's going to be, billions of Africans in 2050, I think may not necessarily be correct. Anyhow, we know that this season of global peace is coming to an end. We know that there is war on the horizon in Europe and in the United States, because those are the places we pay attention to. Those are the places that, Europe is already at war. There's already more people dying in this clash of civilizations than died in the Cold War on an annual basis. So if you accept the idea that the West and the Soviet Union were at war during the Cold War, you must accept that the West and Islam are currently at war in Europe and in the United States, and obviously in the Middle East. So, but, because we're focused on those things, and correctly so, we are Westerners, of course we're more interested in what's happening in the West. But I think that what is developing in Africa is a situation that is of a larger scale and larger scope than the usual sort of thing that sets off the occasional, we are the world, let's go save the Africans sort of thing. It's one thing to try to save the Africans from either their own incompetence or from, tribal and tribal rivalries over there. Most of the famines and all that sort of thing. Whether you're talking about Ethiopia, whether you're talking about Sudan, whether you're talking about Eritrea or whatever, most of those famines were the result of civil wars. It was not just a drought, it was, the consequence of man's activity there. But the West had a free hand to operate how it saw fit. That is increasingly not going to be the case in the future. the West's global power is rapidly disappearing, and China is embarked on a imperial expansionary phase, as is Islam. And that's the thing that people are failing to recognize when they look at the situation in the West. Is, this is just another wave. It's the third great historical wave of imperial Islamic expansion. So because it's obviously, if you pay any attention to the news, you understand it is not simply happening in London. It's not simply happening in Spain. The gates of Vienna are now everywhere thanks to technology. They're in Indonesia. They're in the Philippines. In the Philippines, the Philippine Air Force is bombing its own city. They're literally sending in their planes to drop bombs on their own city, down on the island of Mindanao. Why? Because that is where the Muslim imperialists, the Islamic imperialists, are attempting to establish their rule. So, this is nothing new. Like I said, it's the third wave. There is no single unitary Umayyad dynasty, but we know where it's being funded, by the Wahhabists in Saudi Arabia. They're the ones who are, building all the mosques everywhere, and so, why the USA is supporting this, who knows? But the U.S. is supporting the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia against Qatar, whereas the Germans and Turkey so far have lined up in support of Qatar. So we're in a whole new world now. We're no longer in the sort of East versus West, Soviet Union versus USA, Europe being defended by the U.S. It's not like that anymore. Right now, the U.S. is probably the biggest single problem for the U.S. is probably the biggest single problem for Europe in dealing with their problems. So, question: if the war colleges talk to Van Creveld, why aren't they smarter about immigration? Well, for one thing, Martin hasn't paid a lot of attention to immigration until fairly recently. The article that he wrote, and it's brilliant, it's absolutely fantastic, called War and Immigration, which is in There Will Be War Volume 10, is something that he wrote at my request. I was actually requesting a full book. I was hoping that he would write a complete book on it. Martin is a brutally honest man, and he came back and he said, "Hey, I'm sorry, Vox, but there's just not a whole book there." I said, "Well, what do you mean there's not a whole book there? There's all kinds of, there's got to be scores of examples and all that sort of thing." And the the problem is that he said, "I'd just be saying the same thing over and over and over and over again. There's very little point in me just repeating myself for 200 pages." He said, he said, "I'd be happy to write an article." I said, "I'll take it." So, and of course he goes and he puts something together that is absolutely brilliant, absolutely insightful, and makes a very conclusive case that immigration is war is immigration, and that it is almost impossible to completely separate the two phenomenon, and that the two tend to feed on each other. He brought up the fact that war leads to war brides. Hundreds of thousands after a big war like World War II. You don't tend to think of that in terms of immigration, but it is. Somebody said Martin who? Martin Van Creveld. He's probably the greatest living military historian. To give you an idea of how significant he is, I don't know if you've heard of Yuval, I'm spacing on his last name, the guy who wrote *Sapiens*. He's kind of like the new Malcolm Gladwell, the new Jared Diamond type guy. Anyhow, it's kind of funny because there's actually a story about him in this book Cleo and Me. I could probably find the name by looking in here, in fact. But he was actually Van Creveld's student as an undergraduate, and Van Creveld actually helped him with his PhD thesis, and even helped him a bit with his, I believe, his first book. There's not a print version of There Will Be War Volume 10 yet. There will be eventually. We will get around to it. Anyhow, speaking of Van Creveld, I'm very pleased to be able to say that one thing we were discussing is the cover of his first novel. He's going to be publishing his first novel very soon. Castalia House will be publishing it. And I have to say, it is probably going to be among the most controversial things we will ever publish. I'm not going to say more about that other than the cover alone is going to blow you away. And so it was a lot of fun to get the chance to to show him that and discuss that. But yeah, I mean, if you want to understand the world, if you want to understand war and stuff, I strongly recommend starting with A History of Strategy. It's called A History of Strategy, from Sun Tzu to William S. Lind. Lind's actually a friend of Van Creveld's. And it's basically just an overview of all the writings on war in human history. And so it is a great place to start. You know, he talks about the different writers, their strengths, their weaknesses. And you have to understand that this is a man of whom Jerry Pournelle once said he is a necessary postscript to Van Clausewitz. Now, Van Clausewitz is the second most important writer on war after Sun Tzu, and some would even question whether he's number 2. So when you're talking about a man who is a necessary addendum to the second greatest writer in human history on possibly the most important subject, you are dealing with something that you really, as an educated individual, need to be paying attention to. You know, I mean, I keep going back into his bibliography and reading more of his books that he used to publish. I mean, the stuff, you know, as a game designer, obviously I was very interested in his book on war games. You know, the transformation of war was absolutely prophetic, absolutely correct, and really fundamentally changed the way that people are now looking at war. You know, Lind and the Fourth Generation War is partly the result of his relationship with Van Creveld and the transformation of war. You know, 4GW is a form of what Van Creveld calls non-Trinitarian warfare. But, you know, I went into some of the older stuff, and he writes on logistics. In fact, we were talking about it, and I told him that my favorite book of his is actually The Technology of War. You know, he goes into incredible detail on how the different technological changes changed the way that people not only fought war, but thought about fighting it. So, anyhow, yeah, what I mean by killing, I'm sorry, I just meant to tell you a little bit about my day today with San Giorgio and Van Creveld, and I got a little bit taken away, or got a little carried away. So, anyhow, the long and short being, read A History of Strategy by Martin Van Creveld if you haven't, and look for his first novel coming soon. You will hear about it. It's coming out from Castalia House, and it's going to be a rather mind-blowing topic and concept and cover. But talking about killing the media, what I was actually interested in is I was watching a bit of Mike Cernovich's recent stream or whatever. I'm not sure if it was like being simulcast on InfoWars or not, but he raised a very interesting point, and that point was the New York Times today published an entire article devoted to a single a single tweet about Jack Posobiec. Now, this is kind of incredible because what it shows is that despite the best efforts of Twitter to leash social media, despite the best efforts of the mainstream media to discredit social media and all that goes with it, they are forced to react to what is happening. It's not going to be long before, instead of having a few trolls and having a few random people popping up and trying to distract and disrupt these little dark streams and live streams and periscopes and whatnot, you're going to have the media doing in-depth analyses of what Mike Cernovich said on his Periscope the night before. We are getting very close to that point. Now right now it was mostly something. Right now it was mostly something on. If there's a tweet that is timely and gets retweeted a lot, and then in this case, Got News picked it up, and then Trump picked it up, or not Trump, but Rush picked it up, and all that sort of thing. It's still early days yet, but it is very clear the direction that it is going. And so, I'm sorry, I don't understand the question, what are you doing? I'm just talking, I don't have a, I don't identify as a troll. Well, yeah, that's fair enough, but these days, you can identify as anything. You can be a boy and claim that you're a girl. You can be a human and claim to be an attack helicopter, and we're all supposed to pretend to take you seriously. So, anyhow, but the thing that's important is to understand that the media's credibility is essentially gone. Their power is not entirely gone. Their influence is not entirely gone. But for the greater part of the historical media influence, power, and so forth is gone. They still have the ability to destroy. They still have the ability to harm people. But they no longer have the ability to enforce the narrative. And because they no longer have the ability to enforce the narrative, that means that they are no longer anywhere nearly as useful as they used to be. Now they are increasingly becoming simply, press release outfits. The Washington Post is simply Jeff Bezos' PR. That's it. All it is doing is selling the perspective of Jeff Bezos. And here's what's important. Practically everybody understands that. I'm sure there's still a few 60-year-old, longtime Washington Post readers who remember Ben Bradley and Watergate and all that sort of thing. And they probably still believe that it's an important institution and a fourth branch of government and all that kind of nonsensical, self-serving bullshit that the newspapers have been trying to convince us of for however many decades. But it's not true. What we see now is that the media doesn't really have any more credibility than Pravda did when it was being published by the Soviet Union. People understand, we're kind of moving back towards the old days of yellow journalism when you knew that a Hearst newspaper was all going to run the Hearst line. The infamous yellow journalism thing. And so what we have today is largely a updated variant of yellow journalism. And it doesn't need to be taken any more seriously than a corporate press release. doesn't need to be taken any more seriously than, you know, a tub-thumping, jingoistic newspaper was back in the, you know, 1850s or whatever. So, no, there's no need to buy. I mean, thanks for the offer to buy me a little clip-on microphone, but I don't know how much longer I'm going to be on this particular platform. You know, we'll have to wait and see. You know, I'm going to be getting more on Gab TV, I think, soon. I'm going to still continue to use this because I think it's important to reach out to dealing with people who are not part of the Gab community. You know, there's people who want to remain on Twitter, and that's fine. You know, I'm not interested at all in any sort of echo chamber. I mean, I'm obviously mostly interested in supporting those who are on our side, who are on my side. I always will. But you cannot do outreach by talking only to your own people. And so that's why I'm always happy to have people come on here and ask questions and be skeptical and be dubious and all that sort of thing, as long as they don't troll, and as long as they understand that this is not a debate. You know, you can come on here and ask me a question. You can even ask me a follow-up question if that helps. But when there's several hundred people on, you can't monopolize the discussion with me. You know, they're not here to hear what you have to think. And so, anyhow, it's you know, and you have to understand, I'm entirely happy to discuss things with people that I don't agree with. You know, I mean, you can tell from my talking about him that I practically revere Martin Van Creveld when he's talking about military history. You know, the man's a genius. But when it comes to politics, there's probably not all that much that we agree on. You know, I am much, much closer politically to his friend William S. Lind. I mean, Lind and Van Creveld are like the odd couple in political terms. You know, Lind is pretty far right. Van Creveld is reasonably far left. They get along fine. Why? Because, you know, neither one of them expects the other one to agree. You know, there are people on the left, there are plenty of people on the left who are not SJWs, who are not social justice warriors, and those are the people that can be talked to, that can be reasoned with. But you cannot reason with an SJW. Yes, that's von Clausewitz's most famous expression, that politics, or that actually war is politics by other means, was the original way to put it. See, I think SJW, Marvel, is actually a good opportunity. So, anyhow, the main point about killing the media is all we need to do to kill the media is to keep speaking the truth as we see it, and to keep turning out and to keep talking. You know, one of the things Mike Cernovich was talking about was, he said, you know, people ask me, how can you do what I do? And he said, I don't even know how to answer that. I mean, do what I do, you know, how do you do a Periscope? You know how to do a Periscope. How do you do this? How do you do that? You know how to do all these things. He said, you don't want to do what I do. You just want to have what I have. You want my audience. You know? Well, the way that you build up an audience is persistence. You know, at Castelia House, our blog was very small. It had been going on for a year. Traffic had not increased at all. The quality of the posts being posted by the various bloggers there was excellent, but the blog was not growing. And so Jeffro, the editor, called me up and said, hey, you know, what do we do? How do we grow our readership? And I said, it's very simple. We need to have at least one post every single day. And we will continue to grow. Don't worry about there being too many posts. Don't worry about bloggers stepping on each other's toes. We need to have, you know, at least one, and up to 4 posts a day, every single day, 365 days a year. One of the reasons that, one of the reasons that Mike has 300,000 Twitter followers and I only have 30,000 is very simple. Look at the number of tweets we've done. Mike was really good about building up his readership. He was really good about building up his Twitter followership. I wasn't interested in Twitter. It's not really a good medium for me. I'm not that interested in video. I'm not as good on video as Cernovich is. I'm not going to ever have an InfoWars show. He probably will. I mean, Mike will probably have a whole, TV show and whatnot in the relatively near future. I hope he does, and I absolutely wish him the best of luck and massive success in that. I think he'll do well. But it's not what I do. If you want to see what I do, go get a copy of Crisis and Conceit. It's like 650 pages. That's what I do. I have a new book coming out pretty soon called SJWs Always Double Down. In fact, I was showing Piero and Martin the cover. We're starting to get it ready. I'm still working on it, but it'll be out reasonably soon. It'll be out this summer. Persistence and just banging away is how we are going to kill the media. And the other thing that we can do is, with your help, when you tune into us, you're the ones who make us successful. But not just successful, you're the ones who create our influence. Okay? It makes a big, I don't know how many, because of the way that the Periscope's working, I have no idea how many people are on here. But there's probably, say, something like 500 people. And the total number of whatever, it says 234, but those numbers are always relatively inaccurate. By the end of it all, maybe 2,500 people, 3,000 people will see it. Okay, that's great. Total users 3,202. That's great. But when that goes to 20,000, or when that goes to 30,000, that's when it starts to become significant. And that's when you start to be able to help other people. Stefan Molyneux is very, very important because he helps other people. He brings them on a show, he talks them up, he helps them, he helps them start building their own audiences using the basis of his own massive audience. And so the more that you help and support people that you agree with, the more that the kind of people that I encourage you to help are those who are builders. So like when I look at the alt-right, or just even the alt-light, whatever, who are the builders? Number 1, Stefan Molyneux. Number 2, Mike Cernovich. Number 3, Andrew Torba. Number 4, probably me. Number 5, Tara McCarthy and Brittany Pettibone. Okay? These are the people who use their own platforms to build other people. No, Paul Watson does not. If I had one criticism, and I don't, because I think that people have a right to do as they see fit. But I do think that Paul Joseph Watson would find that his influence would actually be expanded and grow more significant if he were to adopt an attitude more similar to Mike's or to Stefan's. Sean Hannity, Rush Limbaugh, all those people, they are mostly focused on themselves. Pax is great. I love Pax, but he's not, he doesn't really have the same type of platform in that sense. So, I would not put him in that kind of category yet. But that's how we kill the media. By building a better, more honest, less self-serving, and less totally owned media. And so, and that's the only way that you can do it. This is something that I've talked to Milo about. I would like to see more community building out of Milo. I would like to see more of it. I don't expect it at this point. Here's the thing. We're not going to get that from the figures from the old media. We're not going to get that from Ann Coulter. We're not going to get that from Michelle Malkin. We're not going to get that from Bill O'Reilly. We're not going to get that from Sean Hannity. They all fear helping out people who might one day surpass them. Because they think like employees. They think in limited terms. They think in terms of there is this limited amount of space on cable TV. There's this limited number of seats. I have a seat, and if I build someone else up, then I might lose my seat. There's always somebody younger and prettier and that sort of thing. And this kind of relates to what I was talking about a little bit the other day with regards to the women. You can see which women are following the old media strategy. You can see there's a fundamental difference between the way that a Tommy Lauren is operating and the way Tara McCarthy is operating. I think Tara has the long-term better strategy, even though it means she's not going to get plumped down on The View or some sort of platform that someone else hands her. She's going to build her own platform, and she's going to be much more successful in the long run as a result. And so that, to get back to my main point, and I'm sorry for all the digressions, my main point is we kill the media by constructing alternative platforms. We kill the media by continuing to support each other and to continue to build up others. Not necessarily at our own expense, but we do it without worrying about, oh no, is he maybe going to end up with more followers than me? Is he maybe going to end up selling more books than me? Is he going to have bigger traffic and that sort of thing? You can't think like that. You just have to, be happy with what you do and happy with what you have, and be happy about your own improvement. I'm happy about the fact that I'm closing in on 30,000 Twitter followers and on 20,000 Gab followers. That's great. That's fantastic. It's trivial compared to what Mike's got. But, it was only a year ago, that Mike only had 27,000 Twitter followers. He got too big to ignore, and it's fantastic. So, so lift the boats, help people out, give people chances. One of the things that I'm going to do when I get the Gab TV thing going, as soon as I have the ability to, is I'm going to do stuff with people and bring people on and talk to them as much as possible, as long as I can do it live and I don't have to do any editing or that kind of stuff. So anyhow, so that's the idea. Thanks very much for tuning in, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.